this event today, looking at the future, and we would like to look forward of charities and CICs post-COVID-19. I say post-COVID-19, we are still in it, but we're certainly post-lockdown, hopefully for a while, not everybody. There are a lot of statistics out there, but generally the charity sector has experienced a big body blow as a result of the pandemic. The Institute of Fundraising says that UK charities are expecting a 24% reduction in income this year, and that's around about a 12.4 billion loss if you add it up, and voluntary income down by about 24%. The Small Charities Coalition say that about only 1 in 5 small charities are expected to be able to provide a normal service now and in the near future, and 1 in 10 expect to actually make redundancies or are already making redundancies. The Small International Development Charities Network, and I looked at that because one of our speakers today operates abroad, is UK based but operates a charity in Nepal, and they've said that 45% of charities working overseas will have to close without additional funding, and 59% are accessing reserves, which of course charities do not really want to unless there is a crisis, because arguably this is a crisis. However, on the flip side, people and communities arguably need charities and commercial and social enterprises more than they ever did. And we've also seen through some of the huge fundraising activities through COVID that there does seem to be a limitless capacity for generosity within the UK public. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think what's happened is a shake-up for the charitable sector, and I think all our 3 speakers will speak to that in a moment, that there are certainly opportunities that have come out of the impact of COVID and 2020. So I think before I move over, I think what this session about is, what does COVID-19 mean for the relationship between society, the state and the voluntary sector? So I'm delighted to welcome our 3 speakers. We'll start with Cecile Gillard, who's a charity legal expert with the Charities and Civil Society Division of Burton Sweet. And she's going to give an overview of where she thinks the sector is sitting at the moment and how it can move forward. And then we'll hand over to Jackie King. Jackie is founder and CEO of the CIC, If Everyone Cares, which is creating a UK-wide community map of charities and organisations to connect them up and provide support for each other. And then finally, we're going to go abroad, not in sort of theoretically, and speak to Alan Sweetman. Alan is the Executive Director of Pahad Trusts Nepal. They've been operating in Nepal for some 30 years now, improving educational and health facilities for underprivileged, disadvantaged communities. And to date, PTN has built, I need to take my glasses off, raised 4 million to build around 28 projects. Have I got that right, Alan?
I will do that when I come to my piece.
So I'll hand over to Cecile first of all. Cecile. Oh, before I do, little housekeeping. If you'd like to put questions in the chat box at the end, our speakers will talk for about roughly 10 minutes each. And then we'll open it up to a kind of, I'll chair the panel in effect. Pop your questions in the chat box, and we'll have some conversations for the last half hour of the session. Cecile.
Thank you very much, Karen, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Cecile Gillard. I'm a legal specialist, and I advise charities and community interest companies on legal and regulatory, constitutional and governance matters. I work at Burton Sweet, and I work alongside colleagues who provide accounting services, support to those organisations with financial management issues, and of course independent scrutiny of their annual reporting and accounting. And I also provide training for boards and key volunteers. So some of the big challenges for our charities, well, I think they lie around funding, around financial management, around risk, and around service delivery. On the funding issues, as Karen's demonstrated from some of those statistics, there are significant funding shortfalls for many organisations across the sector in general and for particular parts of the sector. There are real challenges around raising funds. How we do that has got to continue to be different for the future, in the foreseeable future certainly, and many of our usual fundraising activities are going to have to be done in a different way or modified. We're certainly seeing an increased demand for services. As the next stage of the pandemic unfolds over the coming months, service needs in communities are rising and will continue to rise. It's a real challenge, I think, engaging people with that message across the whole variety of the charity sector. We're going to be hearing from Alan about a particular charity with an international experience. I think very many people are focused, understandably, so much on their local community that perhaps they're finding it more challenging to raise their eyes higher to see the wider picture for our charity sector. We have reduced people resources. Many of our charities have got very loyal volunteers, and many of those volunteers are staying very loyal to their causes. But of course, at the moment, we're generally often not able to use our volunteers in the ways we had planned to do for this year and beyond. That's equally true of community interest companies as it is of charities. So making use of our volunteer workforce is a challenge for everybody. And unfortunately, in the case of those charities that have paid staff, and interestingly, of course, that's only a minority of charities that have paid staff, but for those that do, they're very often facing not only temporary staffing reductions, but now permanent staffing reductions. I mentioned that most of our organisations are volunteer-led and delivered, and I think that's worth emphasising. It's the case that the vast majority of funding for charities is, generally speaking, directed to a very small percentage of the larger charities, which themselves are facing significant challenges, and only a very tiny percentage of the funding comes towards the smaller organisations. Community interest companies, they are special forms of company which are deliberately legally structured to be able to carry out commercial social benefit activities. But actually most of those are purely volunteer-led and volunteer-delivered as well. There's only a very small percentage that have any kind of staffing levels, and it's then not significant. The vast majority of organisations in both these sectors rely very much on having the ability to generate income and operate on the income that's coming in rather than any kind of longer term resourcing. So that's our background. What about our two regulators? Well, the Community Interest Company regulator is temporarily the registrar of companies, pending the appointment of a new CIC regulator. So there's a degree of hold here at the moment. In the meantime, there's some emphasis on providing greater digital communications for CICs with their regulator. As for the Charity Commission, what I think I see for the future is that it's trying to balance up now the future need for decent regulation of the charity sector, for reassurance to the public, and its work so far, which has been commendable in trying to have some flexibility for charities. There's an increasing emphasis from the Charity Commission on charities meeting public expectations of what it means to be a charity. The chair, Baroness Tina Stoll, has emphasised this in several recent public speeches. To most people, she says, charities are more about standards than structures. Success now depends on charities meeting public expectations on what charity means in the way they go about their work, whatever the cause type or size. And the suggestion is there should be greater transparency and accountability in addressing those expectations. And the chair is supportive of the idea of a new provisional registration of new startups, an easy access point perhaps, but with the oversight that that will be reviewed after a period on the register. That's partly reaction to the significant rise in community action. There's also a call for the Charity Commission to have enhanced powers to remove charities from the register when they're not delivering decent public benefit. So the governance challenges for our boards of our charities and our CICs, well, they're financial management and controls, balancing the short-term pressures with the longer-term planning, tough choices on resources and their use, challenges around well-being, the well-being of your people, your volunteers, your trustees, and succession planning. How are you going to get some fresh trustees on board in these difficult times? I think for the sector capacity and umbrella bodies, organisations like the National Council for Voluntary Organisations, they're using their experience now very much to encourage member charities to share with other charities as they have to deliver their programmes differently. And one thing to look out for is Trustees Week at the beginning of November, which is coming up shortly, where there will be some activities for all of us to be part of. So, what about the survival strategies and some of the positives we're seeing from that? Well, certainly part of the survival strategy we're seeing is making good use of professional advisors, making sure you're in conversation with those that you look to for such advice, keeping up the dialogue. Second feature we're seeing is adjusting relationships with funders and major donors, talking to them about agreed changes to the uses of funding. Related to that, a new and open dialogue with your supporters so that they can understand the changes and the reasons the organisation is making the changes, why those changes are being made. We're seeing moves on that enhanced transparency and accountability as part of organisation strategies. In some cases, there's a much more open public dialogue now about the challenges, the actions that the boards are taking to address those challenges, and what they'd like people to engage with them to help them do. A small number are actually taking quite radical moves like publishing board meeting minutes, obviously with confidential sections removed. We're seeing a lot of work being done strategically on mixed format activities. So the programmes for activities for the coming months from charities are tending to be some adjusted in-person activities as well as some online, moving away from that initial phase of pure online. But we're also seeing, of course, activities done differently. Example of that, mass sleep out for a homelessness charity, which is now going to be organised where people will sleep out in small groups at permitted locations, their workplace, within their own garden, within their support bubbles. We're seeing mutual support initiatives where charities with shared level of interest are sharing. So a good example, a mutual support group where CEOs meet virtually to give people a safe space to share together. Another part of an important strategy move for charities is their constitutions. We're seeing boards wanting to understand where their flexibilities are, where there might be a need for modernisation and change. And we're certainly supporting charities as they look at change and in some cases negotiates permissions with the regulators. CICs the same. We're seeing people look at their structures and flexibilities around their structures. Possible merger, but that's not as popular as looking at collaboration and partnership working as part of the strategy. We're also seeing on the financial management side, people paying good attention to fraud and cybercrime risks. This is Charity Fraud Awareness Week. The estimated fraud losses to the charity sector each year pre-pandemic were 1.9 billion. And across society, COVID-related fraud has increased by 400% this year. Also seeing people look at their insurance terms, and in many cases those have changed, and people are looking at whether there's some capacity there to adjust their insurance mix. And finally, on the big picture, public policy, I think there's some cause for optimism in the new report from Danny Kruger MP, Levelling Up Our Communities, Proposals for a New Social Covenant. This was commissioned by the Prime Minister to look at how we move beyond the crisis into the next stages. Makes recommendations on a new approach to public policy, social action, and our faith communities. So some of the ideas include volunteer support, like a new national volunteer reserve, a volunteer passport to help people be able to move between voluntary roles, initiatives to help underemployed young people volunteer in community and environmental work, some new funding sources drawn from dormant insurance accounts, and a suggestion that the National Lottery Community Fund might be refocused on communities rather than causes, with more localised distribution of funds. And in terms of the commissioning of public services and people's role in that, some new rights to be involved in that, and the use of social value rather than value for money, potentially enshrined in law as a new pivot of commissioning public services. So I think there are some causes for optimism at the higher public policy level if some of those ideas go forward. Karen, back to you.
Thanks, Cecile, for that perspective. I'm going to hand straight over to Jackie, conscious of time. Jackie, let's have your take from the smaller end of the spectrum, if I'm allowed to say that.
Oh, definitely allowed to say that. Yes, no problem at all. So I'm not sure whether or not you've got the slides that you're able to share.
Yeah,
just
I've got. I'm in control of these, so I'm going to see if I can share them now. So just bear with me for a second and make sure we get the right slides up. Here we go.
Fantastic. Firstly, so my name's Jackie King and I'm the founder of If Everyone Cares CIC, and we work on a project called adoddle.org, which is, if I start off with saying we actually live in a digital world where we can find virtually anything we want with a few clicks of a button. Or do we? There are actually over 150,000 registered charities in our community across the UK. There is an unknown number of community groups and projects, and now there are community interest companies in the mix, but there is nothing that brings that information together. But you can go to Google Maps and find a hotel or restaurant virtually anywhere in the world and make an informed decision, but not when it comes to either finding help and support, somewhere to volunteer, somewhere to connect with others, or even for charities and community groups to connect with each other, to collaborate, to share resources, tools, strategies, to have a greater impact. A report was done nearly 4 years ago now by the Eden Project's communities, and it said that disconnected communities were actually costing the country £32 billion a year. Now, when you think of where that money could be spent if the communities were more connected and the charities and the organisations, everything was more connected, that's a lot of good that could go in. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation did at the same time another report on poverty, and that's said to be costing £32 billion a year. And that's all impact on people's lives. And it is our charities and our community groups and organisations that are such a key part of our social infrastructure. They're the fabric that holds us all together. They are the organisations that slip in where there is need, and they are crucial and critical. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thanks. When there isn't a complete picture of what is happening and what's where, then actually it's really hard to make any decisions. And that comes down as to whether it's key policymakers in government. And Cecile just mentioned the Danny Kruger report, the Levelling Up. You know, they brought together some amazing information, but it's only part of the picture because nobody has that full global picture of what's happening and where there's need. So decisions are far easier to make when you have a full picture. Next slide, please. We're going to miss that one because I didn't mean to put it in. It's a new part of what we're doing with a new search one. So we invite at Doddle, we invite all charities, community groups, organisations, CICs to create a free profile. It's a bit like a mini website. We encourage them to share the 5 key things that people really want to know, which is who they help, how they help, the difference they make, the help they need, and crucially, how to get in contact with them. So Doddle actually helps organisations to put all of this information in one space so that people can do that initial finding out before they then go to the website, because every website is set up slightly differently, so it makes it harder for people to find what they need. Next slide, please. So Doddle's about empowering people, and it's empowering them to make their choice, whether it's volunteering, reducing isolation, and it's a personal journey. But I think more crucially, it's about bringing the organisations together and helping them to know what's in the next street, the next town, to make sure that they're not duplicating, to make sure that they can collaborate. Collaboration is absolutely key. And so Doddle is about doing that. But where I've been incredibly privileged on this journey is to meet numerous charities, organisations, to have conversations especially since the lockdown came in. And I would talk to small charities who said that they were struggling enormously. They might have had one paid member of staff. That paid member of staff then needed to go on furlough because they didn't have the funding to be able to do that. That member of staff then wasn't able to manage the volunteers who were still willing to help. And so it became this really tricky position for them. How did they do it? Because if somebody was on furlough, they weren't allowed to be working on that. But if they weren't on furlough, the organisation couldn't afford to pay them. And then they might not have their volunteer in place who would do the funding application. So there were Charities Excellence is an amazing website that actually brought together incredible lists of amazing opportunities for funding. But if the smaller organisations didn't have the key people in place, they actually missed the boat at that crucial time, and they're now playing catch up now that the people who were put on furlough are now back in position. So they're playing catch up with the bigger organisations that were able to keep staff in place, who have then already put in for applications for funding. So it's been this double-edged sword for organisations. If they furloughed somebody, then they may not have had the person to manage the volunteers who could have done the funding application or could have helped to put it out. And so we've seen organisations who have gone online to provide support wherever possible. So one organisation was doing a daily video or a live session so that people who were isolated and alone were able to connect. But now that they're coming back into play and they've got their bigger team, that has stopped because they're having to do the firefighting to keep going. And people who were getting support through online now are feeling as though they've been stuck by the wayside. You know, it's as though we mattered then, but now we don't matter. So there are all these emotions from people in different places within either the community or within the organisations. Volunteers who weren't able to do some of the work they wanted to do are feeling, you know, well, my role is really important, but when you didn't have somebody to manage me, I wasn't allowed to do it. And so there, it's building relationships again. So it's not just funding, there are relationships that need building. The Levelling Up report is crucial, and there are some amazing parts in it. So if any of you who are watching are working in with within charities and within the CIC sector, I really would recommend that you read it. It may be 72 pages, but the content that is within there is vital to how we're going to move forwards. So another organisation that is just on the fringes of setting up that may help some of these smaller charities and organisations to get funding is Brevio. And they're trying to bring it in to one place that you fill out one form, and then funders can actually find you from the information that you've put there. There's a bit more to it, and I don't know enough yet, but actually if they pull off what they're trying to pull off, this could be an absolute game changer within the funding and actually level the playing field for the smaller charities and organisations. And I think that's crucial. I'm going to stop now, and I really want to answer any questions you've got. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie. That's fascinating. We will hand straight over to Alan so that we do have some time for those questions at the end. I'm sure, well, there's one coming already from Tim Mitchell. So Alan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Hello, everybody. I'm Alan Sweetman, Executive Director of Pahar Trust Nepal. Catherine, could I have my slides, please? So I'm just going to provide you with a brief case study of the challenges that we've faced during the pandemic and some of the responses and adaptations that we've taken within the charity. So if we can have a second slide, please, Catherine. So firstly, a brief overview of who we are and what we do. In a nutshell, Pahar Trust Nepal provides improved education, health and sanitation facilities in Nepal. Predominantly, we build schools, and initially, when we were founded, we're building new schools in villages that didn't have access to education. But latterly, and especially since the earthquake in 2015, we find that the majority of our work consists of repairs and refurbishment of unsafe and older buildings in Nepal. As Karen mentioned at the start, we've been running for nearly 30 years, and we were founded by two former Queen's Gurkha engineers. We operate in the Midwest and the far east of Nepal, and all of our construction work is undertaken by a team of 10 staff in our sister NGO who are based in Pokhara. We have one member of staff in the UK, and that is me, although I'm supported greatly by my board of trustees. So can I have the next slide? So since we started, we've delivered over 248 projects. It's probably closer to 255 projects now across 21 districts of Nepal. This consists of 159 new or refurbished schools, 51 libraries and 38 other construction projects, which include health posts, hostels or wash facilities, so toilets and sanitation projects. And our first project was opened in 1991. And we've raised so far around about £4.2 million, and it's worth noting that a significant proportion of that is from individual or group donations rather than grant funding. Grant funding is not something that PTN has historically really raised funds through, which I'll come on to in a minute. So next slide is, how have we responded? And I think everyone here can agree, you know, it's important to note that we're still in a developing situation in the UK, and especially in Nepal, where we haven't even reached the peak level of infections. And actually, despite very slow increases in Nepal, we're seeing it suddenly starting to spike at the moment with major holidays in the country. So I'm expecting that the situation will continue to change. But we've responded to what we know and what we can respond to, and the challenges that we've identified at the moment. So firstly, operational challenges. Nepal initially went into lockdown in March, similar time to here in the UK. And we had a number of construction projects underway, and our construction workers are often working many, many miles from home, 400 miles or so from home. And with lockdown coming in, the first consideration was whether or not we let those teams return home or whether we kept them on site on the hope that we could continue construction. And we took the decision to try and keep them on site and made the commitment that we would cover their costs, subsistence costs during that time. We're quite limited within our construction window because the monsoon in Nepal comes in June, July, August, and it's not very safe to build during those heavy rains, although we did actually have to run a couple of projects through the monsoon. The operational challenge here in the UK is, as Jackie mentioned, as a single member of staff, I wasn't able to put myself onto furlough and we weren't able to access any government support. But in a roundabout way, it's a benefit of being a small charity is that our overhead here in the UK is small compared to many. Second challenge area is around development. With Nepal in lockdown, my team in the NGO were not able to travel out to visit new projects and develop new project proposals, which meant that we weren't then able to approach potential donors here in the UK. And alongside that, with reduced fundraising activities, Ride London, London Marathon, those major programs where we see some fundraising from, they weren't able to take place, but also we have a number of groups that come together and raise funds for us, and that they just simply weren't able to do that. So we've seen quite a significant chunk of that removed from our income. So how have we responded? The first thing that we did is ensured that we maintained the focus on construction. It would be very easy to shift our focus and our attention to direct COVID response, and it's a great temptation to shift to that response to the impact of COVID in Nepal. But we took a decision that by providing continuing construction, we're actually providing opportunities for our team and our construction workers who are contractors to get employment when so many people in the country are losing their jobs. So we're able to keep those people in employment. And our response to COVID, we're trying to do that through partners. So linking with partners that we have in Nepal to deliver that response to COVID on our behalf. We also invested in communications and marketing. We took the decision early on that we needed to build on our position and look forward into 21-22. So looking forward into next year, actually building on the impact and the evaluation of the work that we've done, which historically we haven't been very good at actually shouting about what we do and how, the impact that we're having in Nepal. Finally, within the response, I've lost count the number of times I've reforecast our income for the year, and it's been on a monthly basis, just reforecasting as we've seen projects that have been postponed. And hopefully, mostly into next financial year, but it has meant that we've had to downgrade our forecast, probably about 50% less construction project income this year than we had expected. And we've had to agree to utilise our reserves to cover that gap, which is a tough decision, but it's something that we've had to do, given that we've spent the last year really recovering our reserves to a positive position. So it is a little bit frustrating that we're seeing those go. So how are we adapting towards the future? Well, firstly, we have come up with the first annual campaign, so a year-long campaign for the Trust. It's 30 years since we opened our first school. And so we've come up with a campaign to refurbish 30 early childhood development classrooms, so pre-primary. You can see a picture on the right there of a before and after of one of the classrooms that we're hoping to do. Now, a lot of our projects are fairly big ticket items, up to sort of £60,000 for a brand new 6-room school, which we're aware is going to be beyond the scope of many donors and supporters and funders next year with increased competition. So by breaking this down into 30 smaller projects, we're hoping that we can broaden the number of people that will be able to contribute towards our projects. And also we'll be able to directly see the impact a small donation gets lost within a massive project, whereas that smaller donation can be seen much more clearly within a number of smaller projects. And so we're really hopeful that this will be an opportunity for us to broaden and spread that income. We've taken the opportunity with some downtime, obviously, with limited development that we're able to do here in the UK, to actually start looking broadly at our strategy for the next 3 to 5 years. It's incredibly difficult to do it at this time, of course, but by actually reflecting on what we do and what we do well, we're trying to start broadening what we deliver to enable us to diversify our approach and our offerings to, again, broaden the opportunities for support within our work and broaden the income streams that we've got. For example, returning to existing schools and focusing on teacher training alongside new construction of projects. And finally, it may be seem counterintuitive, having been in a charity during the financial crisis. A lot of drawbridges were pulled up and people didn't want to collaborate. We want to ring fence all our funding. We're trying to take a slightly different approach and look for those opportunities to collaborate in order to broaden our offering. So working with NGOs in Nepal who can bring increased impact and outcomes to the projects that we deliver. And also to offer our services to support those organisations in order for them to be able to deliver more. And at this point, I think there are a number of NGOs over in Nepal and in the UK that work in Nepal who are open for this opportunity for us to come together and actually find a way for us to increase our opportunities for fundraising through trusts and foundations, for example. So that's it. That's a very, very brief introduction, overview of where we've been doing, what we've been doing for the last 7 months, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Alan. That's you've packed a lot in there in 8 minutes. There are some questions coming in the chat box, and I think it's one that I would have posed to both you and Jackie. I think is this. As I referred to earlier, there was a huge amount of fundraising during lockdown and during the summer for NHS charities. Literally millions and millions have been raised. We've got two ends of the scale here. Are the smaller charities, Jackie? And I'm not sure who the questions come from, but there seems to be a groundswell of people who are suddenly aware and keen to support NHS charities. But also less money in the system with lower incomes. How do smaller charities get funding when they don't have the people or the marketing budgets that some of the big charities still have, despite the fact that they've lost income? They still have a lot of boots on the ground still in comparison to some of the organisations that you're probably working with. And Alan, the second part of the question is how do we tackle people wanting to keep money in the UK? Now, you've been raising money for Nepal for 30 years, so obviously people do want to give abroad, but right now, do you see a challenge in people thinking that the money should stay at home and not go abroad? Or has COVID shown us the impact of something that happens worldwide and why we need to continue to support developing countries through a crisis that has become an international crisis, not just a national one? So Jackie, maybe do you want to speak to that for a couple of minutes, and then Alan, and hopefully that addresses the questions in the chat box on that subject. But whoever posed it, please jump in if not.
Yeah, we've seen from one end of the scale to the other for the smaller charities and organisations. We've seen some of the smaller charities and organisations within the communities actually inspire the people within the communities to actually support them. So actually it's helped them through the tough times because they haven't had the ability to do the funding applications. So the larger organisations may have had the ability to do the funding applications, but if a smaller organisation had some great volunteers who were great at encouraging people to part with money or time, they've actually done relatively well because of the community connection. But then at the other end of the scale, if you've had people who weren't maybe great communicators and didn't have that, because they didn't have the team or the skill to be able to do the funding applications, they are struggling enormously. So it's dependent on the skill level and the volunteers that they've had within the organisations. And because each funding application has been a slightly different worded question. So it's not that they've been able to use one set of information that they did for one to then go into another. Each one needs to be slightly tailored, which is an incredible amount of man hours when they're trying to do the firefighting and support the people that they need to support. So it's this chicken and egg situation for many, many organisations. One of the things that I would suggest at the moment for smaller organisations is Small Charities Coalition has become one of the partner organisations for the government's Kickstart for the apprentices. So you can actually, whereas the Kickstart was you had to have 30 employees, so you had to be big enough to be able to take on 30 apprentices. But actually, by going in with an organisation like Small Charities Coalition, you could maybe get one or two, which actually might help you with that ability to do what you need to do. But at the same time, you're giving a young person, you need to remember, you need to support that young person because you're meant to be giving them skills. So there's a potential there for that, which many smaller charities and CICs had thought they weren't eligible for. But I would say look into it, because there are some things out there that can help. But it really has been a matter of from one end of the scale to the other, depending on the skills that were already there and in existence, and who the motivator was, and if they had the ability to get that out there. But if somebody had been furloughed, it put them way down. And we're hearing some stories that are enough to make you weep.
And I think actually that question was from Sue Haswell. So thank you, Sue. Alan, to the point about money going abroad, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times.
Absolutely, and thank you, Sue, for the question. Yeah, absolutely. The focus really within the UK is supporting UK charities, NHS, and we've seen that in all the media. But actually, we've seen, despite not having, our big fundraisers, Ride London Marathon this year, we've actually seen an increase in our general donations year on year compared to last year in response to the COVID pandemic. And most of those are from our existing donors who may have been quiet for a while and have decided that actually they'd like to give us additional support. But I think you're right, actually getting our voice heard into new audiences is where we've got a major challenge. And it goes back to the commitment that we made to really invest in our communications and marketing, because as I mentioned, we're not very good at actually shouting about the good that we do. And so by investing in communications and marketing now, we're trying to just increase the number of people that are aware of our work, because Nepal has we have an affiliation with Nepal through the Gurkhas, and everyone's got a lovely thought about Nepal. And we need to try and capitalize on that impact. And for the amount of money that it costs to create real impact in Nepal compared to how it does here in the UK, it is so much less expensive. But I think within a very crowded market and a COVID response position, I think all we can do is just try and shout about the impact and the positives that we're having in Nepal.
Thank you. Quite a practical question here is from Sarah Budd, I think it is. Jackie, are there ways for smaller CICs to connect with people who can help with funding applications? So I suppose this goes back to the point about, is the sector collaborating more? Are we creating more partnerships? We're looking at sort of economies of scale. Are we being less territorial about our skills and resources?
Oh, again, it's two ends of the scale, because for some of it, we're seeing egos and silos, because people are trying to keep what they're doing to sort of to themselves, because they feel that there's so many organisations that need help and support. And so they're actually sort of holding that very closely to themselves to look after their own organisation. And then you have organisations like Charities Excellence, and that suddenly created this list of an incredible amount of funding opportunities. Finding mentors, and I'm just going to see if I can actually see the wording that's there on the question. Help with funding applications. I think it's, again, there are some amazing organisations out there. So we're signed up, we're getting mentorship through an organisation called Digital Boost. And there are some incredible people out there who are mentors. And you can have an hour session, but I would advise you, record that session. There will be so many nuggets within it that you won't be able to take all the notes down. And so there are organisations like that out there, and that's who we've been using, is Digital Boost. And then we've been going through, just for ourselves personally, Digital Leaders, that was last week, some incredible speakers. Look at who the speakers were, see if you can connect through LinkedIn, but be incredibly respectful. You know, this isn't a free-for-all. It is about being very respectful and remembering who the people are, and, you know, being honest as to why you're connecting at the first point. You know, don't go make a connection and then because they've accepted suddenly start spamming them. It's about having that respect out there. I don't know what else I can say, because I haven't come across somebody who would, you know, an organisation that would actually help you with doing that. Cecile might have, and I also wanted to throw back to Cecile, because one of the things that organisations have, the smaller organisations, charities, have struggled with, is thinking about their governance. What does their insurance cover for them to do? Because some of their activities may not be what they were initially doing. You know, there's a whole host of things along the legal side that have almost hamstrung some of the organisations as well, with what can they do to change the services that they've said they're doing. Can I throw that to Cecile?
Absolutely.
Yeah, just picking up quickly on what organisations and resources. I mean, I point you back to NCVO. Membership of that is free to most sizes of charity. So certainly I would look at that. In terms of the insurance point, I mean, I think I'd perhaps encourage trustees to be a little bit robust, because the truth of the matter is, in most cases, you're not ever going to make a successful claim on insurance. Provided you've got a good handle on what within your organisation it's possible and permissible for you to do. Some of that comes back to the point I made about understanding constitution, and you might need some conversation and some help with that. But I wouldn't rely on insurance as your get out of jail card.
Thanks, Cecile. There was a question, a broad question to everybody, which I think I might kind of end with in a moment. But in the meantime, Andrea wrote to everyone, how do you see the future of international volunteering and the consequences for project support? We had expert volunteers, librarians, scheduled to help a small project in Nepal, but obviously international travel has been impossible and looks to be difficult in the future. I think, Alan, you sort of touched on that earlier. I mean, you are at the moment operating your organisation at arm's length, aren't you? I think ideally, would you be out there 2 or 3 times a year, or trustees? And that's communication. You've got time differences, so all of that comes into the mix as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you say, I'm normally out in Nepal twice a year, and with the trustees who are regularly out in Nepal, we have a representative from the UK pretty much every other month in Nepal during the non-monsoon season. But I think regarding international volunteering, yeah, we do work with a number of schools, taking groups over to Nepal to visit link schools. We have a link school program here. And also other schools from around the world, but at the moment that's all completely on hold, and I can't see that it's going to happen again next year at all. Thankfully, it's not an area where we make, it's not a significant chunk of our income, but it goes back to that raising the profile of us internationally, because then we find that, if you can take somebody to Nepal and they can see our work on the ground, they come back changed, and they come back incredibly supportive of our work. And so we're losing a whole section there. I'm at the moment, Andrea, I can't see us getting back to any kind of sense of normality with international volunteering for possibly even a year. I think it's a real concern. And we have doctors and medical students going over to our health posts to give advice and guidance to the nurses that run those centres. So the knock-on effect is going to be huge. But yeah, it's not going to, I can't see it happening again for at least 12 months.
A practical question here. Jackie, are there any costs to sign up onto a doddle? And I think if I've popped Paha Trust's website into the chat box, Jackie, could you pop the details, the website details on if anybody wants to follow it up? I don't believe there is a cost. And also, Tim Mitchell asked earlier, is it just for UK-based charities?
At the moment, it is. Our goal is actually to grow it so that it actually goes out across other countries. When we did our initial research back in 2012, we added the idea of creating this type of map to the global Sir Richard Branson and Virgin Unite challenge to screw business as usual. And this is when it was literally just an idea. And the idea was voted third from ideas from around the world. And with over 28,000 votes, and we had people from other countries getting in contact with us saying we need it in our country too. And yeah, so it is where it is. No, it costs charities and community groups and organisations, CICs, nothing to add their profile, absolutely nothing. And one of the things that we've done during since lockdown, we realised that people said having a UK-wide map, absolutely fantastic, but they wanted to see their local area. So we did the development during lockdown, and we've now created it that we can create an area-based community map for any area across the whole of the UK. And we've actually launched our first 43 area-based maps. So if there's anybody listening and you've got good connections in your area and you want a map specifically for your area, we can do that. And all the information is linked to the UK-wide one. We also feature organisations as a featured profile of the week, all of it for nothing. So add your details, create that profile, and we will help raise your profile within the community.
Thanks, Jackie. We've got 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to throw out for, it's literally that kind of, you know, in 3 lines, can you say? I think it's a question from Sue. So start with Cecile, but to all of you, what would be your one big wish for 2021 for the charity sector, and how would that help the people that you work with? So if you could see one thing happen in the next 12 months, what would it be? You know, and I suppose I would say, is government doing enough? That's not a political point. It's just, there was, I think, 750 million, I think, was given as a sort of emergency support fund to charities. Was that enough? What do you wish for, Cecile?
I think there is a need for more national level support, both money and other kinds of support at the national leadership level. And I think also locally, I mean, there's a great deal where some of the local leadership could still engage further with our groups so that they can make it easier for them to contribute. I think that commitment to genuinely working together as a long-term new relationships, perhaps what I'd ask for.
Jackie?
For me, I'd like to take the Levelling Up report that Danny Kruger did one step further, and I would like to utilise the work that we're doing at Adoddle to actually have a mapping. We've identified 434 key areas across the UK. I'd like to have a map for every one of those areas, and I would like for every charity, community group and organisation to add their details, so that actually communities, government, key decision makers, organisations can see what this social fabric is of these incredible organisations that make a difference, and that actually people within communities support the local organisations, get involved with organisations, do more volunteering, connect with people, reduce isolation. I just think it needs to be there. There needs to be a full picture of what is going on, because it's amazing.
Alan, you've got the final word.
And I'd
No
have
pressure.
I'd have to agree really with Jackie to sort of really sort of get that demonstration of the impact that we can do within the third sector, and particularly from an international point of view, with the merger of DFID this year. We're looking at losing a lot of money because people just don't understand the value of international development. So I would take it one step further, actually looking at those charities in the UK that are doing great work for the people of the UK, but then the smaller charities like ourselves who are working above and beyond to really support the developing countries, and actually really just getting people to understand why it is so important to provide support beyond just this island that we live on, and the impact that we can make.
Thank you. I'm going to draw this to a close now, 12:58. I've really enjoyed hearing all three perspectives. I've really enjoyed being able to give a platform to organisations that perhaps people haven't heard of before. The work that I've done in the charitable sector, and Jackie, you know, there are so many organisations that are not propping the country up, but that we are relying on and have had a really tough time over the past 6 to 8 months, and will continue to have a tough time. But I hope that we've had some optimism from this session as well, that there are people getting back on their feet, and that there are opportunities for collaboration and cooperation. I'd just like to finish by asking everybody if they could show some appreciation, maybe the little clappy hand in the box. But thank you, Cecile, Jackie and Alan. And if anybody wants any contacts, we've put contacts, I think everyone's put contacts in the chat box there, but do come back to Catherine, who did the sort of the organisation, if there's any follow-up that anybody wants, or to be put in touch with each other. Thank you all for your time this lunchtime, and good luck to Adodal, and good luck to Pahar Trust Nepal. Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in and just say, for everyone goes, we'll share, we've recorded this as well, so we'll share the link later as well. So if you want to get information from it later on, and we'll do a little write-up. So I will send that round.
No, thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.